Hi there team, Michael McQueen here. Great to sort of connect with you via video. I love the fact that our meeting where I was meant to dial in via Skype was so profoundly disrupted, because that's the whole theme of this new book, how to prepare now for what's next. It's all about, I guess, identifying the stuff that could go wrong, the sort of disruptions that will be game changers, then adapting or responding to them. And so that's what we're doing. Hopefully this video will give you some context, some backstory, to help you to sell the book, to promote the book, to give some sound bites when you're speaking to key accounts. I think we're now slated for a March, April release for this book. Apparently, Lucy suggests we're going to have books in stores by the middle of March. Obviously, April's a bit of a mess with Easter and Anzac Day and the rest of it, so we'll be doing a very significant push in May. So anywhere between March and May next year is when we're going to have the real focus on the launch of this book. And I'm really, really excited about it. I think this is going to be a significant book. It's going to be a very helpful book. And Peter has sent through some questions just to answer, to give you some of the information that will be helpful as you're speaking to accounts. So I might launch straight into those. Well, many of you I've already worked with before. You're sort of probably familiar with my backstory. For those who I haven't had the chance to cross paths with in person, I've spent now coming up to 14 years looking at this whole theme of what's changing in society and in the business world. The backstory for me is I started off tracking trends and social change back in 2004, because that's the year we started to see a whole lot of millennials and Gen Ys flood into the workplace, and there was so much discussion about this new young group who didn't know their place, who were presumptuous and entitled and all the rest of it. And being a millennial myself, I thought this is a really interesting discussion. So I spent just over 3 years interviewing 80,000 of them to get a sense of, what's making this next generation tick, what are their values, their attitudes, all that sort of stuff. And then wrote a book about that whole notion. How do you bridge the generation gap? In the years since then, the scope of my research has broadened. So it's not just been focused on demographic change, but social change more broadly, particularly technological change, and the impact of that on business. Now, this book coming out will actually be book number 6 for me. And in many ways, it's the logical next step. The last book that I did with Wiley was around this whole theme of momentum. How do you stay at the cutting edge? How do you make sure a groove doesn't become a rut over time? How do you sort of stay on that growth trajectory as a business? This book will be a slight pivot away from that theme, and the whole focus is going to be on the future. What is coming down the line? What will shape the next 5, 10, 15 years' time? And for any of us, regardless of the industry we're in, how do we start preparing for it now? How do you gear up and get a strategy so that your business model is bulletproof in the face of disruption? And I guess that brings me to what I do on a daily basis today. My role mainly today is consulting and speaking at conferences. And the numbers mean that I can promote the book pretty widely, because every week I'm probably in front of anywhere between 500 and 5,000 people. Some conferences are massive, other ones are just, in-house things for companies, but it's right across the spectrum and right around Australia and beyond. So, every day I'm in front of audiences, learning from them, but also hopefully helping them, and I'll be promoting the book as I travel around. So these days it's consulting and it's speaking, and obviously it's writing as well. That's the main stuff I spend my time doing. Well, this book, How to Prepare Now for What's Next, is essentially broken up into 2 sections. And in a way, the 2 sections mirror the very title of the book, because it's all about preparing now for what is coming next. And so the latter part of the title is where we focus for part A of the book, this whole notion of what is coming next. What are the key disruptions or trends or changes that will shape the next few years? So there are 4 main forms I look at in the book. The first form of disruption we'll see is in the form of wide-scale automation. This is the largest chapter in the book because it's the one that I think most of us are increasingly aware of, but often don't know what to do about. We hear about artificial intelligence, the impact of machine learning, driverless vehicles. There are all these technologies that are going to have a huge impact on professions and industries, but also professionals. We're going to see wide-scale job losses in the years to come as more and more professions and industries become automated. And the interesting thing is, it's not just the industries and professions that you would have expected to be automated. We're talking about many of the white-collar service-based roles. We're talking banking and finance, the legal sector, accounting. Some of these professions that in the past we would never have imagined being automated. And so the first chapter in part A is all about the impact of automation, how it's going to change the game. The second chapter looks at the impact of unconventional competition. In fact, I often encourage clients to realize if you're going to stay relevant in the years to come, to navigate disruption, don't reach for the long-range lens, the telescope, reach for the wide-angle lens, because it's often at the periphery that disruptions will emerge. It's identifying those unconventional competitive threats that will prove to be game changers. That is going to be critical if we're going to stay one step ahead of disruption. And so in this chapter, I look at some of the unconventional competitive threats that are coming into view, but also I give audiences and readers, I guess, an insight into how they can start becoming more aware of those unconventional threats, because that's where disruption will emerge from. The third chapter looks at the impact of empowered consumers. And this third form of disruption is interesting because we're going to see in the years to come consumers or the marketplace have more information, more options than ever before, but the key thing they'll have is a voice. They're going to have a voice that means the consumer will control your brand in the years to come. So for any reader, any business owner, any individual, the customer experience, the user experience is going to matter more than ever before. The fourth form of disruption I look at in part A of the book is in the form of emerging generations, particularly drawing back on the research I've been focused on now for well over a decade, looking at the impact of millennials. As this group come into the workplace, as they become the dominant group of consumers, because to give you an idea, they already represent 35 to 45% of discretionary spending power. The millennials are cashed up, but they're buying different stuff in different ways for different reasons. And so a lot of the focus of this, the fourth chapter, is on how do you understand what the consumer of tomorrow is going to be like, and how do you start positioning yourself to connect with them. So part A, all about change. The interesting thing is the structure of part A really focuses around industries. So when I go through case studies, I break them down into specific industries. So a reader picking this book up in the shop will actually flick through and very quickly see it's quite likely their industry is reflected in part A. I speak to examples that are specific to their profession, their business, their sector, and look at how these trends will unfold in the years to come. So some of the common industries I touch on in part A, the automotive sector, banking and finance, insurance, manufacturing, travel, retail, higher education. These are some of the most common industries, of course, that business book readers are from, and so they'll see that there are specific disruptions related to them. Now that's part A. Part B, which is equal parts, it's half of the book, focuses on the whole notion of how do you prepare now. It's the strategic stuff. For any business, any industry, any leader, I look at the examples of businesses and brands right across the globe who are navigating disruption well, and I tried to distill what are some of the habits, the mindsets, the cultures, the structures these businesses and organizations have that's allowing them to navigate disruption and stay one step ahead of change. And that's, of course, the encouragement I give to readers, is that they've got to dig the well before they get thirsty. You know, reinvent yourself before these disruptions hit. Because if you wait until the changes hit, you're going to find in many cases it's far too late. You know, I guess the distinction with this book from other books on future trends is that, you know, we look at a lot of my colleagues in the marketplace are doing. Many futurists stop at the point of describing what's coming next. They stop at the point of, you know, what's the future going to be like? They outline the shopping list of disruptions and trends. And that can be very disorientating, very unsettling for readers and audiences, because you're like, well, hey, the world's going to be different, but like, what do I do with it? And so that's the real focus of this book. I guess the the point of difference is this book is all about strategic response, not just understanding what's coming next, but giving a clear game plan to readers for getting ready now so they can ride the waves of change and stay one step ahead of disruption. Okay, target for this book is basically business people. I mean, it's the professionals, it's the white-collar suit brigade wandering through airports, traipsing around the country day to day, because they're the ones who, in many cases, they're dealing with disruption on a daily basis. They're going to conferences, hearing about it, are often looking for strategies and insights that will help them be sort of one step ahead of everything that's happening in their industry or even within their own team. You know, this whole notion of how do you as a professional be the thought leader is so important right now. And so this book is ideal for business people right across the spectrum, pretty much every industry you can imagine. And it's not just for business people to read with the view of understanding what the disruptions will be that will impact their organization or their industry, but it even speaks to some of those important personal questions about, well, how do I navigate disruption as an individual? there are two appendixes, two sections at the end of the book that speak directly to the individual. One of them looks at some of the ethical and moral implications of artificial intelligence, the fact that we're going to see wide-scale job losses. So how do you determine whether you're in a profession that is endangered or not, and how do you start getting ready to make sure you are not made redundant by technology? So that focuses on the professional specifically. There's also an appendix that actually goes through a diagnostic tool to help an organization or an individual figure out how prone they are, or how vulnerable they are to disruption. And so the book is definitely for business leaders, but not just businesses at a macro level, but also for individual professionals as well. Well, of course, marketing is a big part of the story, particularly as you're going into work with key accounts to, I guess, give them a sense of the sort of marketing support that's going to be coming not just from Wiley, but from me as the author. And as with any book release, for me, a big part of the focus for the next few months is going to be on specifically supporting the release with PR. And the beautiful thing is, because I've worked with a lot of the media outlets for a lot of years now, both the broadcast media in radio and TV, but also the print media, the relationships with editors and producers are already there. So I'll go back to those relationships, and there's so many juicy topics in this book that I reckon will mean we'll get some great coverage. We're talking Sky Business, Sunrise, the Today Show, but also many of the large radio broadcast channels and also some of the print channels. And when you think about some of the topics like driverless cars and robotics, the impact on jobs, as Amazon continues to ramp up in Australia, the impact that's going to have on the retail sector. I spoke at an event last week for the Financial Review, and so for them, I'm already on the radar in terms of looking at some of the trends that will shape Aussie business in the next 6 to 12 months. So there'll be a lot of press about this book, and I think it's going to really help that groundswell of enthusiasm and interest in the book. And the goal will be to hit that press from probably mid-March through to mid to late May and even early June. So that'll be the main window for press. Apart from the publicity side of things, I'll be marketing the release aggressively to my own database. I've got an email database of about 15,000 subscribers who get my newsletters every 6 to 8 weeks. So I'll be marketing through that channel, social media obviously as well. But I've already lined up a couple of people who are key influencers in my social media networks to be, I guess, leveraging their contacts as well. For instance, a guy who is one of the key movers and shakers within the ACCA, which is a global network of accountants. They've got a huge number of members, hundreds of thousands of members, and he's going to be doing an interview with me that will land just as the book hits shelves. And so that will have a significant uptake within the accounting and finance profession, but also be tapping a number of other key influencers on the shoulder as well to really leverage social networks. Interestingly, this book, I've attracted some great endorsements, and I think that will help as well, because the people who've endorsed the book in the front few pages will hopefully then help share it with their networks. And so I've got, for instance, the incoming world president for Rotary International. So that's 1.2 million members. The incoming global president wrote a foreword for the book. Many of the CEOs from my clients in the last 12 to 18 months have written endorsements, so hopefully promoting to their teams. And we've also had Mike Baird, the past state premier here in New South Wales. So a couple of very high profile endorsements that will hopefully help get the word out. We're also going to focus a lot around the release on some of the corporate tie-ins. So I'm talking at the moment with the NAB. NAB are looking to get bulk copies of the book, probably, and it's not confirmed yet, but anywhere between 20 and 30,000 copies of the book for either their customers or their staff or both. And so it only takes a couple of those to make a big splash and start that word of mouth advertising really working. So there's a lot of stuff happening behind the scenes. This will be my focus over the next few months, is to really gear up to work with Peter to make sure the marketing is top notch and as focused as possible. So hope you get the sense that I'm excited about this release. It's great to be working with you guys again. And if you've got any questions, feel free to drop me a line. Phone number for me, 1300 701 915. Again, that's 1300 701 915, or email me. It's michael@michaelmcqueen.net. So feel free to reach out if you've got any questions. Looking forward to working with you and making this launch an awesome one. Thanks so much.